and welcome back to Crit and Crit. I am Sint.
I am Axion.
And we are continuing through our playthrough of Final Fantasy V and our discussion of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. So, what's a monster?
Oh, that is a very loaded question, and it's almost guaranteed to be different depending on what context you're talking about.
Well, that's going to be an interesting thing to start, so let's go ahead and go through, in common vernacular, when people refer to a monster, what is their primary intent with that word choice?
Okay, if they are being literal, it usually means some kind of creature that is non-human and usually not a normal quote-unquote animal, like something that you would encounter in real life or in a zoo, or it is some animal that is off in some way, unusually aggressive, unusually large, unusually prone to interacting in a negative way with humans, whereas most animals, as we discussed in a prior episode, are more likely to run, hide, or cower if faced with humans. Etc., etc., etc. If they're not being literal, it usually means that they are accusing the... I need to switch him to a more combat-capable job. Let's go with Monk. Where's Monk?
Probably in his apartment washing his hands, if I remember the show correctly.
God damn it. If they're being non-literal, then it's generally meaning that they are accusing a person of being cruel, hostile, and behaving in a vile and violent manner. Being inhumane and, well, monstrous.
So, I think our distinction in definitions comes down to a single letter in that case. Inhuman versus inhumane. Sometimes you come across something that is clearly both, like a rabid wildcat that is basically just here to eat things. It is not human, and it is also not going to be using any sort of basic survival instincts. It's just here to kill. It will probably do so in a very brutal fashion. So there you have a monster in both senses of the word. But in the sense of Harry Potter, we very often just mean it in one of the two senses. Like, Fluffy, to many people, would be a monster because, holy lord, that is a giant three-headed dog and it's going to eat me. And then it rolls over for a belly rub. Or you have, like, Voldemort, who is Wizard Hitler, responsible for many attempted genocides on Muggles and has killed before, even before he graduated from high school. So that would be a monster in primarily a human sense.
Yep, and... No, go ahead.
So yeah. Where this really comes up, I believe, is going to be the most relevant in terms of the form Marauders. Because we have kind of shades of what makes a monster among them. James Potter is not really relevant to this one. We don't find out a lot about him until future books, so we're going to ignore him. So let's look at the other three. Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. All of whom have the ability to turn into an inhuman creature, one of whom is not voluntary in that regard. A giant dog, a rat, and a werewolf. So, each of these animals have a very distinct feeling. Dogs, obviously, are loyal. However, dogs can be loyal to a fault, not thinking for themselves. It is usually not a compliment if someone is referred to as someone else's dog, especially not as their lap dog or their attack dog. It basically just means they will do the bidding of whoever they have chosen as their, for lack of a better term, master, without giving much thought to anything other than they told me to do it and I'm a good boy. Can I have a treat? I should not have said treat. I have a dog looking at me right now.
I was about to say, how quickly did she react?
She was napping and she just looked up at me and tilted her head, so I'm gonna have to write that check later.
Nicely done.
It was gonna happen eventually. We have rats. Rats have never had a good reputation in anything except for Nim. Literally, Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim is the only piece of media I can think of rats being portrayed positively. I've been on a binge through Redwall lately, and rats are unilaterally villains. I think they have one, maybe two, in the same book that they try to give a chance for redemption. We'll get to that if we ever get around to reading Redwall. But there is not a piece of media, aside from the one where it's literally we are escaping being lab rats, that they are treated as the heroes. Rats are carriers of disease. They are self-absorbed. They are always basically referred to as just, they will stab you in the back to further their own interests. Never trust a rat. Like, it is a pretty basic insult, but it kind of cuts deep for a lot of people. And then there are werewolves. Werewolves are not real, obviously. Mythical creatures who, once a month, change shape and lose control of everything about themselves. And the loss of control is a terrifying psychological thing, and it's not unique to, like, shape-shifting stories. So, in universe, only one of these creatures is seen as an actual monster. The werewolf, and justifiably so. As Lupin had mentioned, the Wolfsbane potion that Snape makes for him helps him keep his mind, but it's a recent invention. So,
It was
he
not
can't be
around
cured.
when he was in school.
Yeah, he cannot be cured, but it helps him control the symptoms as long as he takes it in the nights leading up to the full moon. If he doesn't, he goes feral, and that's what happens the night the Dementors attack. Because he was out following Harry and Hermione because he saw Sirius on campus and was like, what's going on here? He didn't remember to take his potion, so when he started shifting, he was going to attack them. He would have regretted it immensely in the morning when he was himself again, because he is the first good Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher they've actually had, and he was honestly a friend of Harry's family, so yeah. But that would not have undone anything that he did in that form. So, going back to the discussion on dangerous creatures, yeah, even well-meaning, you have to be careful with this sort of thing because you can't fix physical lasting damage with an oopsie whoopsie. But then you look at them as people. One of them is regarded as a monster. Sirius Black, mass murderer, betrayer of friends. Sirius Black, the only man who ever managed to escape Azkaban, who unnerved people who saw him in Azkaban because he had not lost his mind. What dark magic was helping him keep his sanity in such a hellscape? Well, nothing. He was innocent, and he knew he'd been framed. There's not a lot of joy to be had in that kind of memory. So, we know Sirius Black was a troublemaker as a kid, but he was not a killer. Remus Lupin? We don't know as much about him as a kid because he wasn't talked up as much as Sirius was because it wasn't his book. But you get the impression he was a pretty good kid, decent marks. No, not a troublemaker. The only problem he had was once a month he literally becomes a slavering lunatic. Pun intended because Moon. And then you have Peter Pettigrew.
I was about to say, and then you have the one who is the monster in the metaphorical sense, speaking of monsters.
But he's regarded as a hero because he faked his own death to avoid any suspicion, framed his best friend for the murder of their other best friend from temporary gain. As he put it to Sirius, he was taking over everywhere. What was there to be gained by refusing him? What was to be gained by refusing the most evil wizard who ever lived? Only innocent lives, Peter. But didn't affect him. He saw an opportunity to get favor and power, and, well, think about the animals they turned into. The little rat was hiding behind the wolf, the big dog, and the big old stag. Probably should have looked into that, guys. So, we the readers get the privilege of knowing more about the situation than basically anybody else, because Harry and Hermione basically went through and did everything. And they can never tell people. So, we know that the one being branded as the monster, while justifiably you should be leery of if he doesn't have his potion, Lupin is probably the best person of those three. He is not consumed with revenge like Sirius is, though it's kind of hard to blame him given the circumstances.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah. It's like, I don't think I can't really fault Sirius for having spent the past 12 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit in worse than prison conditions.
Yep,
and seeing that,
as Sirius said, I've done my waiting in Azkaban.
Yeah. You can't really blame him for wanting a little bit of revenge, especially because, like, it would be really easy for a dog to eat a rat and no one would question it. They just say, oh no, your pet rat got eaten. Would you like an owl? Which is basically what happens for Ron anyway.
I mean, Crookshanks.
Yep. Good old Crookshanks. As actually Sirius even mentions, that cat is insanely smart. It knew there was something up with your rat, and when he couldn't bring it to me, he found a way to get me in to do it myself. He figured out all this other stuff. You have a very smart cat, and Ron did not know how to respond to that because he still hates the cat. Which, this does raise a point I have seen made many times over the internet over the years. The Marauders map. How many years did Fred and George see that Ron was sharing a bed with a man named Peter Pettigrew and never said a thing about it? Because Scabbers... you didn't think about that?
No, I never did.
Scabbers sleeps on his pillow. He's still Peter Pettigrew, and, well, he'd be on the map. He made it. Or maybe they just didn't look at the Gryffindor dorms because they weren't trying to pay attention to those because they didn't need to know if they were going to get caught in their own dorm room. They're supposed to be in the Gryffindor wing. So it could just be they never noticed. Though, I don't know.
It was just that, like, they didn't notice it because it was always under Ron and just didn't pay attention.
Don't know. It's like, I thought you would have seen that for sure. That thing has been going around since Goblet of Fire came out, if I remember rightly.
I did not spend as much time in the fandom as you have.
Don't call me out. But, yeah, so not only has Peter been, hiding as a rat for so long, he's been hiding as a rat in the house of a wizarding family so he can keep his ear to the ground for basically anything that can bring him news. And Sirius even points out, look how much weight he's lost since he found out I escaped. He has been terrified that I would find him and do exactly what I'm going to do right now, except Harry stops him, which we know will turn out to be a bad decision, but you don't really want to teach a kid that murder is the right choice. It usually should not be. Except, we know what happens. We know what happens when Peter escapes and goes back to Voldemort.
Yep. But if they successfully did that, then there would be less story. Oh, hi, Gilgamesh.
Good old Gilgamesh. He should go clubbing in, like, an 80s themed disco. Because they probably would have a Gilgamesh shirt for him. Sorry. But yeah, and this whole idea of what makes a monster does actually play into how the series goes on going forward. Because, well, with the trend of Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers only last a year, Lupin resigns. Not because he doesn't want to keep the job, not because he's lost his memory, not because he's been indisposed from having Voldemort sucking out his soul and being in the back of his head, but because Snape, who is incredibly angry over losing an honor for catching Sirius Black, even though he knew Sirius Black was an innocent man, accidentally lets slip to the Slytherins that Lupin is a werewolf. And Lupin wants to escape the situation with some remnant of dignity, and resigns before he can be forced to. Because people will not want a werewolf teaching their children. People will not want their children around someone like me. They'll be afraid of what would happen.
Right. Well,
And
that worked.
Yep. And the trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, do call this out for the unfair nonsense that it is. Because it's probably pretty easy, and I'm pretty sure it was deliberately intended to be read as an allegory for having a disease.
Yep.
And it could be any manner of things. Like, I think the clearest parallel would be HIV, but...
Which is what Rowling has since said explicitly that that's what it was.
Yes, well, Rowling says a lot of things after the fact, and that kind of makes it difficult to do a critical reading on your own, doesn't it? But, like, I could see this being other things, too. I could see it also being a mental health situation, since there's, especially in recent years, there's been a lot more attention given to taking care of your own mental health and the detriment that not tending your mental health can have on other aspects of your life, and so on and so forth. So, yeah. Given when this came out, and when it was being written in the late 90s, I know that public opinion was starting to soften somewhat on the HIV/AIDS epidemic, but it was, and to some extent still remains, stigmatized.
Mm-hmm.
And Lupin is probably not wrong in reading the winds and being like, yeah, no, that cat is out of the bag, I need to leave before there's a mob. Which is unfortunate, because, as they've mentioned, you're the best Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher we've ever had. And, honestly, we don't really get to see much of what Quirrell does in the classroom, so he is. He is the best teacher they've had. He is the most competent, he has the most interesting lessons for them, he absolutely knows what he's talking about. But because of something beyond his control that he is doing the best he can to manage, one vindictive person has ruined his life. It's mentioned that Lupin looks shabby. Probably because it's very difficult for a werewolf to get a job.
Yeah, he's not a well-off person. He's not had much opportunity to make a lot of money. His robes are described when he's first introduced as of questionable quality.
He's even on the train with the other students rather than making his own way to campus like other teachers presumably have. Like, we didn't see how Lockhart got there the first time, but I do not think Lockhart would have ridden the train like a common student. Though I'm kind of surprised now he didn't ride the train like a common student, because look at all the autographs he could have signed on the way. Actually, do we know if he didn't? We didn't get to see the train ride because that was the flying car year.
We don't
That
know.
is now my headcanon. That is now my headcanon. He rode the train so he could start glad-handing with all the
Oh
students.
my word.
If someone hasn't written that fanfic... All I'm saying is there is no proof to me that Lockhart was not on the train. If you can find proof that he was not on the train, I will back down.
I don't feel like going looking through the inevitable amount of fanfic and speculation that would be required to prove or disprove that.
You don't have the Lockhart for it? So, yeah. This kind of... very often throughout the series, you get to hear them talk about how quaint the Muggles are and how different things happen. And I don't think we see any, like, normal racism, like, skin tone racism, which is just as stupid as the rest of the racism that we do see among the wizarding world. But I think they look down on the Muggles for that sort of thing, and they talk about how the Muggles would want the wizards to solve all their problems for them if they knew about magic, but it's like, why? Why would you assume that? You guys don't have your own house in order. Your ducks are all over the place, get them in a row before you start yelling at the Muggles and how things work. You've invented new ways to create problems for the world, and you think they want you to fix theirs? Like, who's the monster here? The poor guy who just wants to have a job teaching about what he's good at? Or the kid who starts wearing a sling and making up lies about how a teacher tried to kill him? But Malfoy's never going to be seen as a monster because his dad's rich.
I mean, he is to the other protagonists, which is something, I suppose.
But not in a way that's going to be actually meaningful to the story. Like, he's not going to face the comeuppance that we know he deserves because, well, we need the bully character to remain the bully, and character development would break that. But yeah, we're kind of left with this really skewed view of what makes a monster. We have all of Hagrid's creatures, which we've discussed at length in a prior episode, and then we have the fact that a Quisling who willingly sold out his friends' lives and framed one for the crime he committed can be seen as a hero because he lied well enough, whereas a man just trying to get by and who has done nothing to harm anyone is painted as a monster, irredeemably so. And then there's Sirius, who has the reputation of a serial killer, and it's just like, well, I might as well commit the crime I was convicted for. Hold still, Peter. It's like, yeah, dude. You can see where he's coming from, but still, dang. So, yeah. This is, I think, the book where it really starts to open up those gray areas of where right and wrong really falls, because, well, things do start to get darker from here on out. Things happen, which, I mean, we'll get into that when we get into those books, but I don't think it's a spoiler, because, like, the books have been out for so long at this point, most people have at least some passing familiarity with them. At the same time, I do want to kind of restrict that to each book comes out, so,
right,
yeah.
Don't want to go too far out of our ethers.
Yep. So, yeah, I'm not really sure where else to go with this. I think I'm talking in circles anyway.
Yeah, I think we've kind of wrapped this one up particularly well.
Yeah, talking about werewolves, it's just a phase we have to go through.
Of course you did.
Bye!
You had to.